It was present too, while this custom existed, when the Anglo-Saxon king had a claim to his vassal's armor when he died, since it was due to the king as a vestige and substitute for the person bound to him. Generally speaking, just as the thought of primitive peoples has no separate categories for distinguishing merely subjective imaginings and the objectively true conception, so it is unable to distinguish clearly in practice between the particular lawfulness of things. Wherever this is recognized, it readily appears as the personified form of a divine principle, and the self-centered personality that is independent of external factors. The development beyond this stage lies in the separation of these elements. All more advanced economic technology rests upon an increasing independence of economic processes. These processes become detached from the immediacy of personal interests. They function as if they were ends in themselves. Their mechanical process becomes less and less disturbed by the irregularities and unpredictability of the personal element. On the other hand, the personal element becomes more and more independent. The individual becomes capable of developing more independently, not of his economic situation as a whole, but of the a priori factors that determine it. In the course of this distinctive development that separates the objective and subjective elements of practical life, the fact that, in the last analysis, the totality of this practice is based on human subjectivity naturally remains hidden. The organization of mechanical equipment or a factory, even though it accords with objective laws, is, after all, enclosed in personal purposes by the subjective intelligence of man. But this general and positive character is, in a relative sense, focused on one of the elements in which the whole of the area has become fragmented. Spatial separation and technical objectification through money. If we investigate the role of money in this process of differentiation, it first of all becomes apparent that the role of money is associated with the spatial distance between the individual and his possession. The owner of shares who has absolutely nothing to do with the management of the company, the creditor of a state who never visits the indebted country, the owner of a large landed estate who has leased his lands, they all leave their property to purely technical management, with which they have nothing to do, even though they reap the rewards from their property. And this is possible only by means of money. Only if the profit of an enterprise takes a form that can be easily transferred to any other place does it guarantee to property and the owner, through their spatial separation, a high degree of independence or, in other words, self-mobility. It enables the property to be managed exclusively according to objective demands, while it gives its owner a chance of leading his life independently of the specific demands of his possessions. The power of money to bridge distances enables the owner and his possessions to exist so far apart that each of them may follow their own precepts to a greater extent than in the period when the owner and his possessions still stood in a direct mutual relationship, when every economic engagement was also a personal one, and when every change in personal direction or position meant, at the same time, a corresponding change in economic interests. For primitive peoples in all parts of the world, the solidarity between the person and his possession is expressed in the custom that the possession, to the extent that it is personal, conquered or acquired by work, goes into the grave with the owner. It is obvious from such customs how much objective cultural development, whose progress depends upon the continuous accumulation of inherited goods, became retarded. It is only through inheritance that possessions reach beyond the boundary of the individual and begin to lead an objective and independent existence. The personal type of property, firmly united with the owner, is exemplified in early German law, which stated that every gift could be revoked in cases of ingratitude on the part of the recipient, and in some other cases too. The completely personal character of early forms of ownership is rarely illustrated so acutely. A purely individual ethical relationship between giver and receiver has a direct legal economic consequence. The money economy resists such a mode of interpretation even in its external form. The natural gift can be returned in kind, whereas the money gift very rapidly becomes not the same, but only equal in value. Thus the emotional relationship that might have continued between the natural gift and the giver, and that might have been the basis for the counter-demand, is weakened or negated. A gift in the form of money distances and estranges the gift from the giver much more definitely. Because of this separation of object and person, the ages of highly developed and independent technology are also the epochs of the most individualistic and subjective personalities. The beginning of the Roman Empire and the last 100 to 150 years are both periods of a highly developed money economy. The technically refined character of legal concepts is also a corollary of that abstract individualism that goes hand in hand with the money economy. Prior to the time when Roman law was adopted in Germany at the same time as the money economy was also adopted, German law had the concept neither of representation in legal affairs, nor of the institution of the juristic person, nor of property as an object of free individual will, but only as a representative of rights and obligations. A legal system that operates with such concepts is no longer possible once the individual has been separated from his fusion with the particular conditions of possession, of social position and of the material contents of existence and has become completely free and self-reliant, and yet has become conceptually divorced from all specific existential tendencies that belong solely to a money economy. Thus, those life interests that have become purely objective may be abandoned legal techniques of Roman law. The relationship between land and its owner in Germany has gone through several stages. First, landed property was the result of personal position in the community, and then, conversely, the person was determined by his property, until finally the independence of landed property took on a totally different meaning, one in which, at the opposite extreme, the personality was allowed to emerge as completely independent of it. In primeval times the personality covered and absorbed the objective relations, while during the patrimonial period the reverse was the case. The money economy differentiates them both, and possession and personality become independent opposites. The culmination that this formal process experiences in money itself is most clearly illustrated by the expression that appears in the most fully developed money economy, namely that money works, that is, that it exercises its functions according to forces and norms that are in no way identical with those of its owner but are relatively independent of them. If freedom means only obeying one's own laws, then the distance between property and its owner that is made possible by the money form of returns provides a hitherto unheard-of freedom. The division of labor between subjectivity and the norms of the object is now complete. Each has to solve its tasks as they are given by its very nature, and this is done free from determination by internally alien elements. The separation of the total personality from individual work activities, this differentiation by means of money and this individual freedom brought about by differentiation affects not only the rentier. The labor relationship too develops similar features, although they are more difficult to recognize. Earlier economic organizations and their present remaining forms in crafts and the retail trade rest upon relationships of personal subordination of the apprentice to the master, the employee to the store owner, etc. At such levels economic activity is carried out through the interaction of factors that are entirely of a direct personal nature. In each case, this activity is carried out in the spirit of the leading personality and with the subordination of all others to his subjectivity. Through the growing superiority of technical and objective elements over personal ones, this relationship takes on a different character. The production manager and the laborer, the director and the salesman in the large department store are now equally subordinated to an objective purpose, and only within this common relationship does subordination continue as a technical necessity in which the requirements of production as an objective process are expressed. Even though this relationship may be harder on the worker in some essential personal respects, it nonetheless contains an element of freedom in that his subordination is no longer of a subjective personal nature but is now a technical one. It is now clear that any basic liberation that lies in the transition of subordination into an objective form is very closely related to the complete effectiveness of the money principle. As long as the wage-labor relationship is interpreted as a contractual one, it certainly contains an element of subordination of the laborer to the employer, because the working person is hired, as is still most drastically the case with our domestic servants. In reality, the person as a total, unlimited complex of labor power is hired and thus enters the relationship of dependence and subordination to another person as a complete person. However, as soon as the labor contract emerges as the purchase of labor as a commodity, and this is the final result of the money economy, we are dealing with the offer of a completely